Marcus Chen had always been the kind of guy who found adventure in the most ordinary places. At 28, he worked as a freelance tech consultant, but his real passion lay in exploring abandoned places and urban mysteries. His YouTube channel, Hidden Earth, had gained a modest following of people who enjoyed watching him crawl through forgotten tunnels and investigate strange phenomena. The Blackwood Forest incident started like any other weekend exploration. Marcus had received a tip from one of his subscribers about unusual lights being spotted deep in the woods outside Portland. The locals claimed it was just swamp gas or military exercises, but the description didn't match either explanation. Witnesses reported geometric patterns of blue-white light that moved with purpose, sometimes hovering 20 feet above the ground before vanishing completely. Marcus packed his usual gear, camera equipment, portable battery packs, first aid kit, camping supplies, and his trusty multi-tool. He'd learned through experience that preparation meant the difference between a good story and a dangerous situation. The forest was vast, and cell service was spotty at best once you got more than a few miles from the main trails. The drive to the forest took 3 hours, and Marcus arrived just as the afternoon sun began casting long shadows between the towering Douglas firs. He parked at the designated camping area and shouldered his pack, following the GPS coordinates his subscriber had provided. The trail was well marked for the first 2 miles, but then it branched off into smaller paths that seemed to lead deeper into the wilderness. As he walked, Marcus recorded his thoughts and observations. The forest felt different from other places he'd explored. There was an unusual quiet that seemed to muffle even his own footsteps. Birds were scarce, and the typical forest sounds of insects and small animals were notably absent. It wasn't threatening, exactly, but it felt expectant, as if the woods themselves were waiting for something to happen. After hiking for nearly 4 hours, Marcus found himself in a clearing he hadn't expected. The GPS showed he should still be surrounded by dense forest, but here was an open space roughly the size of a football field. The grass was an unusual shade of blue-green, and it seemed to shimmer slightly in the fading daylight. At the center of the clearing stood what looked like a metallic sculpture, but, as Marcus approached, he realized it was technology beyond anything he'd ever seen. The object was roughly cylindrical, about 15 feet tall and 8 feet in diameter. Its surface appeared to be made of a material that shifted between metallic silver and deep blue depending on the angle of observation. Strange symbols were etched into its surface, and they seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. Marcus had seen plenty of hoaxes and art installations in his years of exploration, but this felt genuinely alien. He began documenting everything, taking photos and video from multiple angles. The object hummed very quietly, a sound so low it was more felt than heard. As he circled it, looking for any obvious entry points or controls, he noticed something that made his heart race. There were scorch marks on the ground around the object, and what looked like a trail of damaged vegetation leading away into the forest. Following the trail, Marcus found evidence of impact and movement. Trees were snapped and bent, creating a path of destruction that suggested something had crashed and, then, been dragged or had crawled away from the main object. The trail led toward a rocky outcropping about 200 yards from the clearing. As he approached the rocks, Marcus heard something that made him freeze. It was a sound unlike anything in his experience, part mechanical, part organic, and clearly indicating distress. It was coming from behind the largest boulder. Marcus approached carefully, his heart pounding. Every instinct told him to be cautious, but curiosity and something deeper, a sense that help was needed, drove him forward. Behind the boulder, Marcus found her. She was humanoid in basic structure but clearly not human. Her skin had a silvery blue tint that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and she was smaller than a typical human, probably around 5 feet tall. Her limbs were elongated and graceful, and her face, while alien, conveyed unmistakable intelligence and pain. She was injured, with what appeared to be dark fluid seeping from wounds on her left arm and side. Marcus stopped dead, his mind racing. First contact with an alien species was not something he'd ever imagined happening during a casual weekend exploration. The being he found himself thinking of her as female, though he had no real basis for that assumption, was clearly in distress. She was conscious but weak, and her large eyes, a shifting purple color, fixed on him with what he interpreted as a mixture of fear and desperate hope. For several long seconds, they simply stared at each other. Marcus slowly reached for his camera, thinking this moment needed to be documented, but something about her expression stopped him. She wasn't a discovery to be recorded, she was a person who needed help. He slowly lowered his hands, showing his palms in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent. She made a sound, soft and musical, that might have been an attempt at communication. Marcus couldn't understand the meaning, but the tone was unmistakably one of pain and need. He pointed to himself and said, "Marcus," then pointed to her with a questioning expression. She tilted her head, considering, then made another musical sound that might have been her name. It sounded something like Zira to his ears, so that's what he decided to call her. Zira's injuries were clearly serious. The dark fluid, her blood, presumably, was flowing steadily from the wounds, and she seemed to be growing weaker. Marcus had basic first aid training, but he had no idea if human medical supplies would work on alien biology. However, doing something seemed better than doing nothing. He slowly approached, moving carefully and speaking in soft, reassuring tones. "It's okay, Zira. I want to help you. I'm going to look at your injuries, all right?" She watched him carefully but didn't try to move away as he knelt beside her. The wounds looked like they might be from some kind of energy weapon or perhaps damage from her crash. The edges were cauterized, which explained why she hadn't bled more, but the injuries were still serious. Marcus carefully cleaned his hands with antibacterial gel and then examined the wounds more closely. To his surprise, when he gently touched the area around the injuries, Zira's skin seemed to respond to his touch. The silvery blue surface where he made contact shifted to a warmer, more golden hue. She made a soft sound that didn't seem pained, and her breathing appeared to become easier. Marcus decided to try applying some of his basic first aid supplies. He used sterile gauze to clean around the wounds and applied antibiotic ointment, working slowly and carefully. Throughout the process, Zira watched him with those shifting purple eyes, and Marcus found himself talking to her continuously, explaining what he was doing and reassuring her that he meant no harm. As he worked, Marcus found himself wondering about her story. How had she come to be here? Was she alone, or were there others? The craft in the clearing, was that hers? And, perhaps most importantly, was anyone looking for her? The thought of other aliens potentially searching for Zira made Marcus realize they couldn't stay in this exposed location. Night was falling, and the temperature was dropping. Zira's alien physiology might not be adapted for Earth's climate, and her injuries made her vulnerable. He needed to find shelter and figure out a longer-term plan. Marcus tried to communicate the idea of moving to a safer location. He pointed toward the forest, then mimed walking. Zira seemed to understand, but when she tried to stand, it was clear she was too weak to walk far. Marcus faced a crucial decision. He could leave her here while he went for help, but that would mean leaving an injured alien alone in the wilderness. He could try to carry her, but she was injured and he didn't know how sensitive her wounds were to movement. Looking into Zira's eyes, Marcus made his choice. He carefully scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she felt despite her height. Her skin felt warm against his arms, and she made a small sound that he chose to interpret as gratitude. She seemed to trust him completely, which only made him more determined to justify the trust. The hike back toward his camping area was slow and careful. Zira occasionally made soft musical sounds, sometimes seeming to respond to things he said, and Marcus found himself chatting with her as if she could understand every word. He told her about his work, his explorations, and his promise to help her find a way home. "I don't know what happened to you, Zira, but I'm going to figure out how to help," he said as they made their way through the darkening forest. "I'm probably not the person you expected to run into on this planet, but sometimes life surprises you." As they reached his campsite, Marcus realized his weekend exploration had turned into something much bigger. He was now responsible for an injured alien being, and he had no roadmap for what came next. All he knew was that Zira needed help, and, despite the impossibility of the situation, he was determined to provide it. Setting up his tent with one hand while supporting Zira was challenging, but he managed. She seemed fascinated by his camping equipment, her eyes following his movements with obvious intelligence. When he activated his battery-powered lantern, she made a pleased sound and reached out to touch the light with one long, graceful finger. As Marcus settled in for what he knew would be a sleepless night, he looked at Zira resting quietly beside him. Her breathing seemed steadier, and the golden glow where his skin had touched hers earlier appeared to be spreading slightly, which he hoped was a good sign. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he'd committed himself to helping her. His simple weekend adventure had become something that might change everything he thought he knew about the universe. Outside the tent, the forest remained unusually quiet, but Marcus was no longer thinking about mysterious lights or unexplained phenomena. He was thinking about the trust in Zira's purple eyes and the responsibility he'd taken on. Tomorrow, he'd need to figure out how to help an alien being heal from her injuries and find a way home. Tonight, he'd simply stay awake and make sure she was safe. The adventure that had started with curiosity about strange lights had become something much more profound. Marcus Chen, weekend explorer and amateur investigator, had found himself cast in the role of protector and healer. As he watched over Zira through the long night, he wondered if he was ready for whatever would come next. The forest around them held its breath, as if sensing that something significant had begun. Dawn brought new challenges and unexpected revelations. Marcus had dozed fitfully through the night, waking every hour to check on Zira. Each time, he found her watching him with those shifting purple eyes, and he'd begun to suspect she'd been guarding him while he slept. The thought that an injured alien had been protecting him while he tried to help her was both humbling and touching. In the morning light, Marcus could see that Zira's condition had improved significantly. The golden coloration that had appeared where he'd touched her had spread to cover most of her torso, and her wounds looked less severe. More importantly, she seemed stronger and more alert. When she attempted to sit up on her own, she managed it without apparent pain. Marcus offered her some of his trail mix, not knowing what alien digestive systems might be able to process. Zira examined the nuts and dried fruit with obvious curiosity, tentatively tasting small pieces. Her reaction to the almonds was particularly positive. She made pleased musical sounds and seemed to want more. The dried fruit, however, caused her to wrinkle her face in an expression that was universally recognizable as distaste. As they shared breakfast, Marcus noticed that Zira was studying him as intently as he was studying her. She seemed particularly interested in his hands, watching how he manipulated objects and used his fingers. When he demonstrated the zipper on his jacket, she made excited sounds and reached out to try it herself. Her own hands were similar to human hands but with longer, more delicate fingers and what appeared to be slightly more flexible joints. Communication remained a challenge, but they were making progress. Marcus had started a simple vocabulary exchange, pointing to objects and saying their names in English, then listening as Zira provided what he assumed were the equivalent words in her language. Water became a liquid musical sound. Rock was a deeper, more resonant tone. Tree was a complex melody that seemed to capture the rustling of leaves. The real breakthrough came when Zira touched his forehead. Marcus had been trying to explain the concept of help when Zira reached up and placed her palm against his forehead. The moment of contact was electric, not painful, but intensely startling. Suddenly, Marcus found himself experiencing flashes of images and emotions that weren't his own. He saw a spacecraft, sleek and beautiful, traveling through star-filled void. He felt Zira's joy and excitement as she piloted the vessel on what appeared to be her first solo exploration mission. Then came the terror and confusion as something went wrong, systems failing, the ship spinning out of control, the desperate attempt to find a safe place to crash land. The images were accompanied by emotions so vivid that Marcus felt tears in his eyes. Zira's fear during the crash, her pain from the injuries, her desperation as she realized she was stranded on an unknown world. But underneath it all was a fierce determination to survive and a deep sadness at the thought that she might never see her family again. When the connection ended, both Marcus and Zira were breathing heavily. She looked at him with an expression of surprise, as if she hadn't expected the mental link to work with a human. Marcus realized she had been trying to communicate with him the only way she knew how, and somehow their minds had found a way to bridge the species gap. "I understand," Marcus said softly. "You're exploring, like me. But you're lost and hurt, and you want to go home." Zira nodded, a gesture that apparently translated across their species. Then, she did something that surprised him even more. She placed her hand over her heart and, then, touched his chest, right over his heart. The message was clear: she trusted him, and she was grateful for his help. With basic communication established, Marcus felt a new urgency to find solutions. Zira's spacecraft might be reparable, but he had no way of knowing what kind of damage had been done or what resources would be needed to fix it. His first priority was getting them both back to civilization where he could research and plan. Breaking camp took longer than usual because Zira insisted on examining everything Marcus did. She seemed fascinated by human technology, even simple items like his camping stove and sleeping bag. Her greatest interest, however, was in his smartphone. When Marcus showed her the device, her reaction was immediate and intense. She took the phone carefully in her hands, and her skin began to change color again, shifting from silvery blue to a warm amber. The phone's screen lit up without Marcus turning it on, and Zira made excited musical sounds. She touched the screen, and somehow, without any apparent interface, she began accessing the phone's systems. Marcus watched in amazement as his phone displayed readouts he'd never seen before. Zira seemed to be using it as some kind of diagnostic tool, running what appeared to be complex calculations. She showed him the screen, pointing to various numbers and graphs, and though he couldn't understand the specifics, her tone suggested she was pleased with what she was finding. Through a combination of gestures and the limited mental connection they'd established, Zira managed to communicate that human electronics were more compatible with her technology than might be expected. This was promising news for the possibility of repairing her spacecraft, but it also raised questions about how she knew so much about Earth technology. The hike back to Marcus's truck was slow but steady. Zira walked under her own power now, though she tired easily and needed frequent rests. During one of these breaks, Marcus noticed movement in the distance that made his blood run cold. There were vehicles approaching through the forest, military vehicles, by the look of them. Marcus grabbed his binoculars and confirmed his fears. 3 dark SUVs and what appeared to be a mobile command unit were making their way along the forest access road. They were still several miles away, but they were definitely heading toward the area where Zira's ship had crashed. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. If the military or government agencies had detected Zira's arrival, they would want to capture her for study. Everything he'd read about first contact scenarios suggested that beings like Zira would be treated more like specimens than people. The thought of her being imprisoned in some laboratory made him feel physically sick. He showed Zira the approaching vehicles through his binoculars. Her reaction confirmed his fears. She made distressed sounds and her skin shifted to darker, more muted colors. When she looked at him, her purple eyes were filled with fear and a desperate plea for help. Marcus made the most important decision of his life in that moment. Instead of continuing toward his truck, which would put them directly in the path of the approaching vehicles, he led Zira deeper into the forest. They needed to find another way out, one that wouldn't involve explaining to government officials why he was traveling with an injured alien. For the next several hours, Marcus used every skill he'd learned in years of wilderness exploration to keep them hidden and moving toward safety. He chose routes that avoided clearings where they might be spotted from the air, and he used his knowledge of local geography to head toward an old logging road that might provide an alternate exit from the forest. Zira proved to be remarkably adaptable to wilderness travel. Her alien physiology seemed well suited to moving quietly through dense vegetation, and her senses were clearly superior to human norms. Several times, she alerted Marcus to the sound of helicopters before he could hear them, giving them time to find cover. During one extended period of hiding beneath a fallen log while helicopters circled overhead, Marcus and Zira established a deeper mental connection. This time, instead of just sharing images and emotions, they began to exchange more complex concepts. Marcus learned that Zira was indeed an explorer, part of a species that valued knowledge and discovery above almost everything else. Her people, whom he came to think of as the travelers, had been aware of Earth for some time but had maintained a policy of observation without interference. Zira's crash landing was not part of any official mission. She had been conducting unauthorized reconnaissance, driven by curiosity about human culture and technology. More troubling was Zira's revelation that other species were also aware of Earth, and not all of them shared the travelers' peaceful intentions. Some viewed humanity as a potential threat that should be eliminated before it could develop interstellar capabilities. Others saw humans as potential slaves or resources to be exploited. Zira had been studying Earth's defenses and technology levels as part of her unauthorized research, trying to assess whether humanity was ready for open contact. Her conclusion was sobering: Earth was both more and less advanced than her people had believed. Human technology was surprisingly sophisticated in some areas but completely absent in others that the travelers considered essential. The mental sharing also revealed something that changed Marcus's understanding of their situation completely. Zira hadn't crashed by accident. Her ship had been shot down by another alien vessel, one belonging to a species that the travelers called the Dominion. The Dominion had discovered her unauthorized mission and decided to eliminate her before she could report back to her people. This meant that Zira wasn't just lost and injured, she was actively being hunted by aliens who wanted her dead. And, now, by helping her, Marcus had painted a target on himself as well. As if summoned by his thoughts, a new sound reached their ears, not helicopters or ground vehicles, but something else entirely. It was a low, thrumming noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Zira's reaction was immediate and terrified. Her skin shifted to a dark, almost black coloration, and she pressed herself against Marcus in obvious fear. Looking up through the forest canopy, Marcus caught a glimpse of something that defied his understanding of technology. The object was massive, probably 200 feet across, and it moved through the sky with impossible silence despite the thrumming sound. Its surface was dark and smooth, reflecting the sky like black water, making it difficult to see except when it passed directly between them and the sun. The Dominion ship was hunting for Zira, and it had found their general location. Marcus realized that hiding in the forest was no longer an option. The alien hunters clearly had technology that could track them through any conventional concealment. They needed to get to human civilization, where the presence of other people might provide some protection, or at least witnesses to whatever might happen next. But getting to safety meant traveling across open ground where they would be visible to both human and alien pursuers. Marcus looked at Zira, seeing the trust and fear in her purple eyes, and knew that he was the only thing standing between her and capture or death. The weekend adventure that had started with curiosity about strange lights had become a desperate fight for survival. Marcus had to find a way to keep Zira safe from both human government agencies who would want to study her and alien hunters who wanted to kill her. As they prepared to make a dangerous dash towards civilization, Marcus realized that his role had evolved again. He wasn't just to protect her anymore, he was Zira's only hope of survival and possibly humanity's first line of defense against threats from the stars. The abandoned mining facility that Marcus remembered from previous explorations became their temporary sanctuary. Hidden in a valley about 5 miles from where they'd encountered the Dominion ship, the old concrete buildings and underground tunnels offered protection from aerial surveillance. Marcus had discovered the place 2 years earlier while researching local history, and he'd always thought it would make an excellent hiding spot if he ever needed one. He'd never imagined needing it for reasons like this. Zira's condition continued to improve during their desperate flight through the forest. The golden coloration that had appeared where Marcus touched her was now spreading across her entire body, and she seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. More remarkably, her healing appeared to be accelerating whenever she was in physical contact with Marcus. During their rest breaks, when she leaned against him or held his hand, the improvement was visibly faster. The underground section of the mining facility provided the concealment they desperately needed. Marcus led Zira through a maintenance tunnel he'd explored before, emerging into a large chamber that had once housed processing equipment. The space was dry and surprisingly warm, heated by some kind of geothermal activity that had probably contributed to the mining operations decades earlier. While they caught their breath in their underground refuge, Marcus and Zira worked to expand their communication abilities. The mental connection they'd established was becoming stronger and more sophisticated. What had started as sharing simple images and emotions was evolving into something approaching telepathic conversation. Through this developing link, Marcus learned more about the scope of the threat they faced. The Dominion wasn't just hunting Zira, they were preparing for a larger operation against Earth. Her unauthorized reconnaissance had accidentally uncovered their advanced scouting mission, and now they were accelerating their timeline to prevent her from warning either her own people or humanity. Zira explained that the Dominion's standard approach was to eliminate a planet's potential defenders before moving in for resource extraction. They had identified several humans who showed unusual aptitude for understanding alien technology, people who might be able to organize effective resistance if given time and resources. Marcus was disturbed to learn that his own activities, documented on his YouTube channel, had brought him to their attention.
So they know about me?
Marcus asked, though the question was communicated more through mental images than words. Zira's response came as a complex mix of emotions and concepts that roughly translated to, your curiosity and problem-solving abilities mark you as dangerous to their plans. Plus, now that you've helped me, you've proven you're willing to risk yourself for others.
They consider humans like you to be priority targets for elimination.
The revelation that his hobby of exploring mysteries had marked him for death by alien invaders was surreal, but Marcus found himself oddly proud that his character had been noticed across species lines. If being the kind of person who helped others in need made him a target, then he was in good company. Their communication breakthrough came when Zira attempted to share technical information about her damaged spacecraft. The mental images she transmitted included detailed schematics and repair procedures, but also something unexpected: her ship's computer had been downloading and analyzing Earth's internet during her approach and crash. Marcus realized this meant Zira had access to vast amounts of human knowledge and could potentially understand English much better than she'd been letting on. When he confronted her about this, her response was sheepish, a combination of embarrassment and amusement that translated clearly across species.
You can understand me when I talk, can't you?
Marcus said aloud.
Zira's musical voice attempted English for the first time. Some words, yes. Your language is complex. Many meanings for same sounds. Easier to share thoughts directly.
Hearing her speak English, even haltingly, created a new intimacy between them. Marcus found himself grinning at her accent, which was musical and alien but somehow charming. Zira seemed pleased by his reaction, and her skin shifted to warmer, brighter colors.
We need to talk about your ship, Marcus said. Can it be repaired?
Possible, but difficult, Zira replied in her musical English.
Need human technology to replace damaged systems.
Your electronics more compatible than expected, but ship's quantum core is damaged. Without repair, cannot contact my people for help.
Marcus felt a chill.
If Zira couldn't contact her people to warn them about the Dominion threat, then Earth was truly on its own against an alien invasion. He also realized that their situation was even more desperate than he'd thought. Not only were they hiding from immediate threats, but they were potentially the only ones who could prevent a planet-wide catastrophe.
What do we need to fix your ship? Marcus asked. Zira's explanation involved technical concepts that pushed the limits of their communication link.
As near as Marcus could understand, they needed high-powered computer processors, advanced materials for component replacement, and access to significant electrical power sources. Most challenging, they needed these resources without alerting authorities to what they were doing. Marcus spent several hours thinking through the logistics. His work as a tech consultant had given him connections throughout the industry, and his reputation for solving unusual problems meant people trusted him with sensitive projects. If he could convince the right people that he was working on a revolutionary but secret technology demonstration, he might be able to acquire what Zira needed. The plan that emerged was ambitious and risky. Marcus would use his professional contacts to obtain the necessary components and equipment, claiming he was working on a proof of concept for a new startup. Meanwhile, Zira would remain hidden at the mining facility, using the time to study human technology more thoroughly and prepare detailed specifications for the repairs. Before Marcus left to begin gathering resources, Zira shared one more crucial piece of information.
The Dominion ship hunting them wasn't operating alone, it was part of an advance fleet that was already in the outer solar system.
If they couldn't get Zira's ship repaired and her message sent to her people within the next few days, the Dominion would begin their attack on Earth's infrastructure.
How long do we have? Marcus asked.
4 of your days, perhaps 5, Zira replied. Then, Dominion will disable your satellites and communication networks. After that, planetary assault begins. Marcus felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was one person with limited resources, trying to prevent an alien invasion while keeping both himself and Zira alive. The rational part of his mind insisted this was beyond anything he could handle, but, looking at Zira's trusting purple eyes, he knew he had to try. Their goodbye was more emotional than Marcus had expected. Over the course of 2 days, he'd formed a connection with Zira that went beyond friendship or even the bond between protector and protected. The mental link they shared had created an intimacy he'd never experienced with another being, and leaving her alone felt like tearing away part of himself. Zira seemed to feel the separation just as acutely. When Marcus prepared to leave, she placed both hands on his face and shared a final mental image, a vision of Earth as seen from space, beautiful and blue and alive, with the clear message that this was worth fighting for.
"I'll be back," Marcus promised. "With everything you need to get home and warn your people."
"I know you will," Zira replied.
"You are, what is word, hero? Even if you do not believe it yourself." The journey back to civilization felt surreal after 2 days of hiding in the forest with an alien being.
Marcus had to consciously adjust his behavior to seem normal when he reached his truck and began the drive back to Portland. Every helicopter or plane overhead made him tense, wondering if it might be searching for them. His first stop was his apartment, where he showered, changed clothes, and began making phone calls. Marcus had cultivated relationships with people throughout the tech industry, from startup founders to corporate executives to independent researchers. Now he called in every favor and utilized every connection he had. His cover story was that he was working on a revolutionary new computing project that could change the industry, but the details had to remain confidential due to patent considerations. He needed high-end processors, exotic materials, and access to a secure facility with substantial power capabilities. The project was time-sensitive, and he was willing to pay premium prices for fast delivery and discretion. Marcus's reputation for innovative thinking and his track record of successful consulting projects opened doors that might have remained closed to others. Within 6 hours of starting his calls, he had commitments for most of what Zira needed. The final piece of the puzzle was finding a suitable location for the repairs, somewhere with enough power and privacy to work on alien technology without attracting attention. The solution came from an unexpected source. David Kim, a former client who'd become a friend, owned a prototype manufacturing facility that was currently between projects. When Marcus explained that he needed secure workspace for a sensitive demonstration, David offered the use of his facility for a week.
"Just promise me I get to see whatever you're building," David said with a grin.
"This sounds like the kind of crazy project that either makes history or explodes spectacularly." Marcus promised to show him everything once the project was complete, knowing that David was going to be more amazed than he could possibly imagine. By the end of his first day back in civilization, Marcus had secured everything on Zira's list and arranged for delivery to David's facility. He'd also liquidated most of his savings to pay for the materials, but money seemed irrelevant when the stakes were planetary survival. That night, alone in his apartment for the first time in days, Marcus found himself missing Zira's presence. The mental connection they'd shared had spoiled him for ordinary human interaction. He could communicate more clearly with an alien being than he could with most people of his own species. More troubling were the dreams that came when he finally fell asleep. Marcus found himself experiencing visions that he was certain came from Zira, images of Dominion attack ships spreading across Earth's sky, cities burning, and humans fleeing in terror. In the dreams, he could feel Zira's desperate urgency to warn her people and prevent the catastrophe. Marcus woke before dawn with absolute certainty that they were running out of time.
Whatever challenges lay ahead in repairing Zira's ship, they had to succeed.
The alternative was too horrible to contemplate. As he prepared for another day of gathering resources and making preparations, Marcus reflected on how completely his life had changed. 3 days ago, he'd been a curious amateur explorer looking for interesting content for his YouTube channel. Now he was preparing to help repair an alien spacecraft in a desperate race to prevent the invasion of Earth. The transformation from weekend adventurer to humanity's last hope should have felt overwhelming, but Marcus found himself energized by the challenge. For the first time in his life, he was engaged in something that truly mattered. Zira's trust in him had awakened something he hadn't known he possessed, the willingness to risk everything for a cause greater than himself. Marcus Chen was becoming the hero Zira had seen in him, even though he still didn't see it in himself. The rescue mission to retrieve Zira from the mining facility proved more complicated than Marcus had anticipated. When he returned with a rented truck loaded with equipment and supplies, he found the area crawling with government activity. Black SUVs were stationed at every access road, and helicopters continued their systematic search patterns overhead. Marcus spent 3 hours circling the area, looking for any way to reach Zira without being detected. The mental connection they shared had grown stronger during their separation, and he could feel her anxiety and growing weakness. Being isolated from human contact seemed to be affecting her healing process. The golden coloration that had spread across her body was beginning to fade. Finally, Marcus remembered an old ATV trail that led to the mining facility from the opposite direction. The path was overgrown and barely visible, but it might provide access without encountering the government perimeter. He abandoned his truck at a distant parking area and loaded the most essential supplies into a heavy backpack for the hike. The trek took most of the afternoon, and Marcus arrived at the facility just as daylight was fading. He found Zira in the underground chamber where he'd left her, but her condition had deteriorated noticeably. Her skin had returned to its original silvery blue, and she seemed smaller and more fragile than before. When Marcus entered the chamber, Zira's reaction was immediate and profound. Her skin began shifting to golden hues before he even reached her, and, when they touched, the change accelerated dramatically. It was clear that their physical connection was somehow essential to her healing process. "I thought you might not come back," Zira said in her musical English, which had improved during their separation. "Government people searched very close. I was scared they would find me." "I promised I'd come back," Marcus replied, holding her hands and feeling the warmth that flowed between them. "I've got everything we need to fix your ship. But we need to move you somewhere safe first." Through their mental link, Marcus shared his plan. David Kim's manufacturing facility would provide the perfect environment for the repairs, with high-powered electrical systems and sophisticated equipment. More importantly, it was a secure location where they could work without interference. The challenge was getting Zira there without being detected. Marcus had brought different clothes for her: a hooded sweatshirt, jeans, and sneakers that would help her blend in among humans. With her height and build, she might pass for human at a casual glance, especially in dim lighting. Zira's reaction to wearing human clothing was fascinating to observe. She seemed delighted by the textures and construction of the garments, and her skin shifted to warmer colors as she experimented with the fit. When Marcus showed her how to use the hood to conceal her distinctive features, she practiced pulling it up and down with obvious pleasure. "Human clothing is very clever," she observed. "Functional but also decorative. My people's garments are more practical." The escape from the mining facility required every stealth skill Marcus had developed over years of urban exploration. They moved carefully through the underground tunnels, emerging only when Marcus was certain no surveillance was active in their area. The hike back to his truck took nearly 4 hours, with frequent stops to rest and listen for pursuit. Zira's endurance impressed Marcus consistently. Despite her recent injuries and weakness, she adapted to wilderness travel with remarkable grace. Her alien physiology seemed well-suited to moving quietly through natural environments, and her enhanced senses repeatedly warned them of approaching helicopters or ground vehicles. During one extended period of hiding while a search team passed nearby, Marcus and Zira deepened their mental communication link. The improvement in Zira's English was partly due to her studying human internet resources, but mainly because their telepathic connection was allowing her to access his linguistic knowledge directly. Marcus learned that this kind of mental bonding was unusual even among Zira's people. The travelers typically shared thoughts and emotions only during formal ceremonies or intimate relationships. The fact that they developed such a strong connection across species lines suggested something unprecedented was happening. "Is this normal for your people?" Marcus asked during one of their rest breaks. "No," Zira replied thoughtfully. "Mental bonding usually requires compatibility of neural patterns.
That you and I can share thoughts so easily suggests. I am not sure of word in English. Perhaps destiny is close. The concept that he might be somehow destined to help Zira seemed absurd to Marcus, but he couldn't deny the strength of their connection. When they were in contact, he felt more complete and purposeful than he ever had in his life. If this was destiny, it was the best thing that had ever happened to him. The arrival at David Kim's facility marked the beginning of the most intense period of Marcus's life. David had prepared the main workshop as requested, setting up powerful computers and clearing space for what he assumed would be some kind of revolutionary prototype demonstration. Marcus's first challenge was introducing Zira to another human without revealing her true nature. He prepared David with the story that his project partner was extremely shy and had social anxiety, preferring to work in dim lighting and avoid direct conversation. David, accustomed to working with eccentric technical people, accepted this explanation without question. Zira's first encounter with another human besides Marcus was tense for all parties involved. She kept her hood up and stayed close to Marcus, but David was clearly intrigued by their obvious closeness and her unusual appearance in the shadows. Your partner seems really dedicated to this project, David observed after Zira had retreated to adjust some of the computer setups. And she's obviously brilliant. I've never seen anyone configure systems that quickly. Marcus felt a moment of panic, wondering if David was becoming suspicious, but his friend's expression was simply admiring. Apparently, Zira's technical skills were impressive enough to overshadow any questions about her unusual behavior. The real work began when they finally had privacy to examine Zira's detailed repair specifications. Using the mental link, she shared complex technical information that pushed Marcus's engineering knowledge to its limits. Her ship's technology was based on principles that human science was only beginning to understand, but there were enough similarities to make the repairs theoretically possible. The quantum core that powered her ship had been damaged in the crash, creating cascade failures throughout the vessel's systems. Repairing it required rebuilding the matrix that contained the quantum field, using components that didn't exist in human technology but could be approximated using sophisticated electronics and exotic materials. Marcus found himself serving as both assistant and translator as Zira worked on the repairs. She would share mental images of what needed to be done, and he would figure out how to achieve similar results using human equipment and materials. It was like trying to perform brain surgery with stone tools, but somehow they made progress. The work was exhausting for both of them. Zira had to maintain precise mental focus while manipulating quantum fields using improvised equipment. Marcus had to process complex technical concepts while simultaneously handling the physical aspects of the construction. They took turns resting, but even during breaks, their mental connection meant they were sharing the cognitive load. After 18 hours of continuous work, they achieved the first major milestone, restoring partial power to Zira's quantum core. The success was marked by a low harmonic tone that seemed to come from the core itself, and Zira's skin shifted to brilliant golden hues in response. "It's working," she said in amazement, speaking in English without thinking. "The quantum matrix is stabilizing. We might actually be able to complete the repairs." Marcus felt a surge of hope and determination. If they could restore Zira's ship to functionality, she could contact her people and warn them about the Dominion threat. Earth might have a chance to prepare for what was coming, or perhaps Zira's people would arrive in time to help with the defense. But their celebration was interrupted by an alarm from David's security system. Multiple vehicles were approaching the facility, and they didn't look like normal business visitors. Through the workshop windows, Marcus could see black SUVs taking positions around the building. Government agents in tactical gear were deploying with military precision, clearly preparing for some kind of operation. Marcus realized that despite all their precautions, they'd been discovered. "We need to get you out of here," Marcus told Zira urgently. But Zira's response surprised him. Instead of fear, her expression showed determination and resolve. "No," she said firmly. "The repairs are almost complete. If we run now, there won't be time to finish before the Dominion attack begins. I must complete the mission." Marcus felt a surge of conflicting emotions. His every instinct demanded that he protect Zira from capture, but her logic was undeniable.
If the government agents detained them now, Earth would face the Dominion invasion without warning or preparation. The sound of vehicles surrounding the building was getting closer, and Marcus could hear voices coordinating what sounded like a tactical entry. They had perhaps minutes before the facility was breached.
How long do you need to finish the repairs? Marcus asked.
2 hours, maybe less if I push the quantum field beyond safe parameters, Zira replied. Then, we hold them off, Marcus said, surprised by his own words.
Whatever it takes.
Looking around David's workshop, Marcus began calculating defensive positions and obstacles they could use to buy time. He'd never imagined himself in a situation where he'd be preparing to resist government agents, but the stakes were too high for conventional thinking.
Zira watched his preparations with obvious admiration.
You are truly remarkable, she said. Your people are fortunate to have someone willing to stand against such odds for their protection. Our people, Marcus corrected her.
We're in this together now.
Outside, the tactical teams were finalizing their positions. Marcus and Zira had perhaps 10 minutes before the assault began. In that time, they had to figure out how to defend an alien spacecraft repair operation against trained government operatives. Marcus Chen, weekend explorer and amateur investigator, was about to become Marcus Chen, defender of Earth against alien invasion. The transformation was complete. He was no longer just helping one injured being. He was standing as humanity's representative in a conflict that would determine the fate of 2 worlds.
The final test of his heroism was about to begin.
The confrontation with the government forces began not with violence, but with an unexpected twist that changed everything. As Marcus prepared defensive positions and Zira worked frantically to complete the quantum core repairs, David Kim emerged from a back office where he'd apparently been monitoring the situation. Marcus, we need to talk, David said calmly. Before those agents break down my doors. Marcus spun around, expecting to see betrayal in his friend's eyes, but instead found something much more complex. David's expression was serious but not hostile, and he was looking at Zira with recognition rather than surprise.
You knew, Marcus realized. You knew what she was. David nodded slowly. I've known since you brought her in.
Marcus, there are things about me, about this facility, that you don't know. I'm not just a prototype manufacturer, I'm part of a civilian defense network that's been preparing for this exact situation for over a decade. The revelation that David was part of some kind of secret organization might have been shocking under normal circumstances, but, given everything else that had happened, Marcus found himself simply accepting it as another impossible thing in an increasingly impossible situation.
What kind of network?
Marcus asked while continuing to monitor the approaching agents through the windows. Scientists, engineers, former military personnel, people in government positions, anyone who believed that first contact was inevitable and that we needed to be prepared for both friendly and hostile encounters, David explained quickly. We've been watching the skies and building resources in case we ever needed to either welcome visitors or defend against them.
Zira had stopped working on the repairs to listen to David's explanation.
Her purple eyes were wide with surprise, and her skin had shifted to colors that Marcus had learned indicated deep interest and hope.
You have been preparing to help people like me, she asked David directly. People exactly like you, David confirmed. We've been monitoring communications in this area for the past week.
We know about the ship that was shot down, we know about the government response, and we know about the larger threat you're trying to warn us about. Marcus felt a surge of relief mixed with disbelief. If David's network was real and had been preparing for alien contact, then they might actually have a chance of completing Zira's mission and defending Earth against the Dominion.
What about those agents outside?
Marcus asked, gesturing toward the SUVs that were now completely surrounding the building.
David smiled grimly. Some of them are with us.
The others are about to get a very big surprise. As if summoned by David's words, the sound of approaching vehicles changed. Instead of the tactical teams beginning their assault, there were new arrivals, more vehicles, more voices, and what sounded like a significant argument breaking out in the parking area. Through the windows, Marcus could see that the original government agents were now facing off against a second group that had arrived in identical SUVs. The two groups were clearly not cooperating, and heated discussions were taking place between people who were obviously in command positions. Jurisdictional dispute, David explained. One group represents the standard government response to unusual phenomena: contain, study, classify. The other group represents a more enlightened approach that recognizes we might need alien allies more than alien prisoners. Zira had returned to working on the quantum core repairs, but Marcus could sense through their mental link that she was paying careful attention to the human drama unfolding outside. Her people had apparently studied human politics and organization enough to understand the significance of different government factions competing for control. The argument outside was escalating. Marcus could see officials pointing at the building, consulting tablets and phones, and generally appearing frustrated with whatever bureaucratic deadlock they'd encountered. More importantly for their mission, the immediate threat of assault had diminished while the humans sorted out their disagreements. How long can they keep arguing? Marcus asked David. Long enough for your friend to finish her work, David replied. Especially since I just sent them some additional paperwork to argue about. David showed Marcus a tablet displaying official-looking documents that appeared to be government authorizations and jurisdictional claims. Marcus couldn't understand the legal language, but the effect was clear: the two groups of agents were now engaged in bureaucratic warfare instead of tactical operations. You forged government documents? Marcus asked, impressed despite the circumstances. I have friends in legitimate positions who owed me favors, David corrected. Sometimes the best way to fight government overreach is with more government, applied strategically. Zira's work on the quantum core was approaching completion. The harmonic tones from the device were growing stronger and more complex, and her skin was now radiating golden light bright enough to illuminate the entire workshop. Marcus could feel through their mental link that she was pushing herself beyond safe limits, forcing the quantum fields to stabilize faster than normal procedures would allow. Almost finished, Zira announced, though the strain in her voice was obvious. Quantum matrix is holding stable. Communication systems should be online in 10 minutes. Marcus felt a surge of anticipation mixed with anxiety. Once Zira contacted her people, everything would change. Earth would no longer be alone in the universe, for better or worse. But their moment of triumph was interrupted by a new threat that made the government agents seem trivial by comparison. The low thrumming sound that Marcus had learned to associate with Dominion ships began to resonate through the building. Looking up through the workshop skylights, Marcus saw something that made his blood freeze. The massive black shape of a Dominion vessel was descending through the clouds directly toward their location. It was much larger than the ship they'd encountered in the forest, easily 500 feet across and bristling with what were obviously weapons. Outside, the arguing government agents had stopped their bureaucratic warfare and were staring up at the sky in shock. Whatever jurisdictional disputes they'd been having seemed suddenly irrelevant in the face of an obvious alien threat. They found us, Zira said, her voice heavy with despair. The Dominion tracked my quantum signature. They know I'm trying to repair my ship. Marcus felt his heart sink. They'd come so close to success, only to face an enemy with overwhelming technological superiority. The Dominion ship could probably destroy the entire facility with a single weapon discharge. But David's reaction surprised them both. Instead of fear or resignation, his expression showed determination and, perhaps even satisfaction. Good, David said, activating controls on his tablet. We've been hoping they'd give us a clear target. Marcus was about to ask what David meant when the building around them began to change. Panels in the walls slid open, revealing equipment that was clearly not part of a normal manufacturing facility. More importantly, the ceiling opened to reveal what appeared to be some kind of sophisticated defensive weapon system. Your network built this? Marcus asked in amazement. We built facilities like this all over the country, David replied, his fingers dancing over the control interface. Defensive installations disguised as civilian businesses, ready for the day when we'd need them. The weapon system that emerged from the facility's roof was unlike anything Marcus had seen in human technology. It appeared to be based on principles similar to those Zira had been working with, some kind of energy projection system that used quantum field manipulation. We've been reverse engineering alien technology for years, David explained as he brought the weapons online. not from crashes like your friend's ship, but from analyzing the energy signatures of alien visitors who've been observing Earth.
We knew this day would come.
Above them, the Dominion ship had completed its descent and was hovering perhaps 200 feet above the facility.
Marcus could see weapon ports opening along its dark hull, preparing to eliminate the threat that Zira represented. But, before the Dominion could fire, David's defensive system struck first.
The energy beam that lanced upward from the facility was brilliant white gold, similar in color to the light that radiated from Zira when she was healing. It struck the Dominion ship's hull and immediately began causing visible damage, not destroying the vessel outright, but clearly hurting it significantly.
The Dominion ship's response was immediate and violent.
Energy beams and projectile weapons began raining down on the facility, but Marcus realized that David's preparations had been thorough. The building was protected by some kind of shield system that deflected or absorbed most of the incoming fire.
"This is incredible," Marcus shouted over the noise of the battle. "How long have you people been preparing for this?" "Since 1947, David replied, not taking his eyes off his controls. "Every unexplained sighting, every piece of unusual technology, every hint that we weren't alone, we've been cataloging and preparing."
Zira had continued working throughout the battle, and, suddenly, the quantum core reached full activation. The harmonic tone became a complex melody that seemed to resonate through the building structure, and brilliant light filled the workshop.
"Communication array is online," Zira announced. "I can contact my people."
Marcus watched in amazement as Zira began transmitting what appeared to be a complex message using controls that existed only as patterns of light and energy. Her hands moved through the air above the quantum core, manipulating fields that he couldn't see but could feel through their mental link.
The battle above them was intensifying. More Dominion ships were approaching. Marcus could see at least 3 more dark shapes descending through the clouds.
But he could also see that David's facility wasn't alone in its defense. Energy beams were beginning to lance upward from other locations on the horizon, suggesting that the defensive network was activating across a wide area. "Your message," Marcus said to Zira urgently.
"Did it get through?"
Zira's response came through their mental link rather than spoken words, a complex mix of hope, determination, and love that told him everything he needed to know. The message had been transmitted, her people had received it, and help was coming.
"How long until they arrive?" Marcus asked.
"Soon," Zira replied aloud, though her attention remained focused on the communication system. "My people are already in this star system, observing from the outer planets.
They can be here in hours." Above them, the battle was turning in favor of the human defenders.
The sophisticated weapons systems that David's network had prepared were proving effective against Dominion technology, and the alien ships were beginning to withdraw to higher altitudes. But Marcus could sense through Zira that the immediate battle was just the beginning. The main Dominion fleet was still approaching from the outer solar system, and this engagement had simply announced that Earth was no longer defenseless.
"What happens now?"
Marcus asked, looking between David and Zira. "Now we prepare for the real war," David replied, beginning to shut down the defensive systems. "And we hope your friends' people are as good as their reputation suggests." Zira turned to Marcus, her purple eyes bright with emotion. "My people are coming, and they know about the Dominion threat. Earth will not face this alone." She placed her hands on Marcus's face, sharing a final mental image not of destruction and invasion, but of 2 worlds working together to defend against a common threat. In the image, Marcus saw himself standing alongside both humans and aliens, no longer just a protector of one injured being, but a bridge between species facing their greatest challenge together. "You saved more than just me," Zira said softly. "You saved 2 worlds, and you helped create an alliance that will change the galaxy." Marcus looked around at the evidence of humanity's hidden preparations for contact, David's facility, the defensive weapons, the network of people who'd been working in secret for decades to prepare for this moment. Then, he looked at Zira, the alien being who trusted him with her life and her mission. The weekend adventure that had started with curiosity about strange lights in a forest had become the first chapter in humanity's emergence as a spacefaring species. Marcus Chen, amateur explorer and tech consultant, had indeed become the hero Zira had seen in him, not through any special abilities or training, but through the simple willingness to help someone in need and see it through to the end. Outside, the government agents were probably trying to figure out how to file reports about alien battles and secret defensive networks. Above, alien ships were regrouping and preparing for larger conflicts. Around the world, humans and aliens were beginning to work together to face threats none of them could handle alone. But, in the workshop where an alien quantum core hummed with otherworldly energy, Marcus and Zira shared a moment of quiet satisfaction. They'd done what needed to be done, against impossible odds, and the universe was better for it. The adventure was far from over, but the foundation had been laid for something unprecedented, a true partnership between species, forged in crisis and tested by fire. Marcus Chen had risked everything for a broken alien girl, and, in doing so, had helped create a future where neither humanity nor the travelers would face the darkness alone.